If you've ever had questions about the Bible and who really wrote it, then you're going to want to pay close attention to our next guest. Tim Mahoney is an investigative filmmaker, and his quest for answers led him on a fascinating journey deep into the lands of the Bible. Take a look at this.
Moses had written down all the instructions from God, as well as the history of his people, beginning with the creation of the world.
If you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words? So there it looks like you have a definitive statement from Jesus that Moses produced the Torah, and he's staking an awful lot on that reality.
The question of Moses' ability to write the first books of the Bible led me to the ancient lands of the Middle East, searching for patterns of evidence that match the biblical events.
The Lord said to Moses, write this in a book.
He would have written in Egyptian, probably, if he had written, not Hebrew.
Did Moses write the Torah? Frankly, I don't think so.
I don't think any mainstream scholars would any longer hold that view.
I think it comes from Moses himself.
The words that they wrote, many of them can be deciphered. Those are Semitic words.
I can read it. This etching, this inscription somewhere in the Sinai desert is actual plain biblical Hebrew.
It's not just a matter of historical curiosity. Well, Moses wrote these books and not some anonymous figure. It is that Moses is the chosen man of God.
That looks good, doesn't it? I can't wait to see that film. It's going to come out shortly. We'll have more information about that. But Tim Mahoney, welcome to Real Life.
Well, thank you for having me, Tom.
So it's called The Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy. What's the controversy?
Well, you know, a lot of people have asked me that question, you know, what is the controversy? Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? And most Christians believe that. But as soon as you send your son or your grandchildren off to college, they're going to hear a different story. And that's one of the things that I didn't realize, because I grew up in a Christian home. I didn't know there was a controversy about the writing of the Bible, or that the Bible was being accused of being false or myths. But that's what's going on right now, and a lot of scholars today don't believe that the first books of the Bible were written by Moses, and they don't believe a lot of the stories in the Bible. They think that they're exaggerations, or that they were stories that grew over time and eventually somebody wrote them down. But Moses wasn't the author of the first books of the Bible.
And what's that do to us? What's that do to our faith? I mean, it might seem like a simple thing. Oh, well, somebody wrote it. It could still be God-inspired. What's that begin to erode?
In this investigation, what I started to understand was that if you look at the rest of the Bible, it all goes back and says that Moses wrote it. And Jesus even talks about this.
Right.
Jesus says that because you don't understand, or you don't believe in Moses and the prophets, you don't understand who I am. He's basically, you know, claiming that Moses existed. Jesus refers to Moses many times, and so do the Gospels, and so does the Apostle Paul. And if Moses didn't exist, then who is Jesus talking about? Do you see?
Right, right. Now, in this film, as in your previous special that we've aired here about the Exodus, you enter into the den of lions here. You enter into academia, right, and into all these really smart guys that have studied this really in depth. And what are you finding that most mainstream scholars are saying?
Well, you have to know that Pittsburgh is the place I landed when I entered that area, and I drove off to Penn State to meet with Egyptologist Donald Redford. And then I went a little bit further, and I met with a very famous archaeologist, Bill Deaver, or William Deaver, and he was there all throughout the archaeological periods of the last 50 years, William Deaver. These two men, and one other man, Doug Knight, who's from Vanderbilt, what was a surprise to me was that they're very learned men, but they don't believe that Moses was the author of the first books. But they all grew up in Bible-believing homes. And over time, they somehow were convinced that the stories of the Bible weren't as they were proposed. They weren't written by Moses. And today, sadly, they're all agnostics.
Yeah, and I hope we'll get a chance to talk a little bit later about one of them in particular, William Deaver, and his story, because it really is impactful in the movie. But I wanted to ask you, let's set the stage here of what is the technical problem that we're showing here. We have a clip related to the alphabet, and really the center of this controversy is the writing and the alphabet. Let's watch that clip, and then we'll come back and share about that.
This is an extremely well-written, complex document that reflects mastery of the language, linguistic mastery, a remarkable uniformity from beginning to end. It reflects sophistication, elegance, artistry, all the kinds of things you might look for in a piece of world-class literature. The Torah itself has it.
And every Torah scroll that has been found was written in a Hebrew alphabet. It was clear that this would require another step to look for in my investigation. If Moses wrote the Torah, and just as importantly, the Israelites were able to read it, they would have needed the power of an alphabet. The question is, was there an alphabet available at the time of the Exodus?
Well, Tim, we're going to talk about the alphabet in a minute, as we can see there that's the center of the controversy. But could you set the timeline up for us and what the problems are? Because it's fascinating, and you do a great job with graphics in the movie about explaining that this is where they say the Exodus happened, where Moses would have been writing the Torah, but there's no evidence for it, and therefore they don't accept it. But what did you find out?
Well, there's a particular time in history when a lot of scholars today are saying the Exodus that didn't happen had to have happened at that time, which is around 1250 BC, right, the time of Ramesses. And our first film looked at this big question because I was hearing from Egyptologists and archaeologists that the Bible itself doesn't claim that time. The Bible itself is several hundred years earlier, around 1450 BC. So not the time of Ramesses, but an earlier time period. And that's what our film did, is we started to look earlier in history, and that's where we uncovered evidence for Joseph and his family arriving. We uncovered the enslavement and the plagues and the conquest. All of that happened earlier. This new film picks up on that. And once again, people say that Moses couldn't have written because Hebrew writing didn't exist until 900 BC.
Well, let's stop right there, because that's the big thing. It's like, oh, wait a minute. They're saying that the writing that would have been enabled Moses to write the Torah didn't exist at that time. Well, all of a sudden, that's like a manhole cover thrown at us here. So what did you find?
So what we said was, well, could we find any writing system? Is there a writing system that shows up at the time in history when we see the Israelites in the region where the Israelites lived, which would have been in Egypt? And it would have to be a form of writing like Hebrew. And then later on, we basically realized that it had to be alphabetic. And so that's what we look for.
Because the Egyptians did hieroglyphs. We've all heard about hieroglyphics. And of course, that would have been a huge undertaking to write the Torah in hieroglyphs. So we needed an alphabetical style of writing. And we have another clip that dives into a little bit of that. So let's go to that now.
This is from ancient Egypt. It's from the Old Kingdom, maybe about 400 years before Abraham lived.
It's very old then.
It's very old.
So what is the connection with Egyptian hieroglyphs and the oldest alphabet?
Well, this is the very writing script that's the basis of the world's oldest alphabet. They were formed from 22 of these hieroglyphic signs.
Are there any of those examples here on this?
Yes. In fact, here is a wave of water. When you convert this into a proto-consonantal alphabetical letter in Hebrew, this becomes the M, because for Hebrews, water is mayim. So they see the wave of water, they're thinking mayim, and they pronounce m.
So this is where the alphabet came from. But how did it develop over time? When you look at the family tree for the beginning of the alphabet, it starts with the Proto-Sinaitic script, which when found in Canaan is called Proto-Canaanite. Then, in the standard view, the alphabet is believed to have developed into Phoenician hundreds of years later. In this view, Phoenician branches into other scripts such as Old Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, continuing on to numerous alphabets over the centuries. But was the first alphabet related to Hebrew?
Well, was it? Was the first, boil that down for us.
Yeah, is the first alphabet Hebrew? And so basically what we started to look at was, is it Hebrew? That's the big question. And we find that this alphabet, actually the shapes of this alphabet do come from someone who lived in Egypt, but they weren't Egyptian. Somebody in this film uncovers that at the time of Joseph and his family, some Semitic person took hieroglyphs and modified them into the basic idea of an alphabet. And this technology is so powerful that it became the basis of all alphabets for the last 4,000 years and spread throughout the world. And that's what this film is uncovering, that there is a connection between what we believe is to be Hebrew and this very first alphabet.
And that is a radical, kind of a radical volley into the world of academics there. It's different from what is being generally shared in classrooms. Well, we're going to have a lot more with Tim later. Well, we're back with Tim Mahoney talking about his search. First, we have this clip. Watch this.
I am asking the questions for my own faith. I want to know if Moses wrote.
It's not just a matter of historical curiosity. Well, Moses wrote these books and not some anonymous figure. It is that Moses is the chosen man of God. He is the man who spoke to God as a man speaks to his friend. And so Moses has great authority. And that is why I think Jesus and the apostles, when they spoke of the books of Moses, they refer to him by name because he was Moses. He was this chosen man of God.
So, Tim, did Moses write the Torah?
Absolutely. I believe he did. And I think that I wanted to answer this question because I'm making a series of films, series of patterns of evidence films, and I'm going to be going on to, was Moses writing an eyewitness account? So the next film we're working on is the Red Sea Miracle. And I wasn't at all planning on getting involved with the question of Moses being able to write, but the evidence shows that there is this alphabet, this type of writing that shows up at the time that the Israelites are in Egypt. And it migrates with the Israelites to Israel. And as you see in the film that's coming out in the next week here, it's going to be amazing to show you how strongly this connection is. So I believe there's so many patterns in this film that encourage and affirm faith. But the bigger idea here, and this is the one that I was struck with, and it is the fact that writing systems have to be able to be read. And if it was hieroglyphs, only scribes or priests, you took years to learn hieroglyphs because there's like 1,000 characters. Yeah. But with an alphabet, with just maybe 26 letters, you could easily teach it to a child. And this is exactly what the command in the Bible was. Moses said, you are to teach these commands to your children. Write them on your doorposts, write them on your gates. So what we're going to reveal here in this is that I believe that God possibly inspired this whole issue of an alphabet because it was then able to take the words of God and give them to regular people. And the only book in the world that has utilized the alphabet more than any other book is the Bible. This alphabet spread throughout the world, and so did the Bible.
Right. You know, it's exciting that it seems like God brought writing right at the time he needed it.
Yeah.
But I want to make it, just bring it to a personal level, because you talked to William Deaver in there. He's a eminent scholar in these areas. But tell his story, because it really struck me. His story is kind of reminiscent of some of the other scholars' stories. Will you just share what was the situation with him?
Well, he was raised in a Bible-believing home, just as some of the other scholars. But as time went on, and as he studied more, he became skeptical of the historical credibility of the Bible. Yes. And eventually, I think that he became an agnostic. And so when I asked him if there was even a God, he couldn't answer that question. And so I have two groups of scholars. I have some scholars who basically were able to find answers, and other scholars who didn't. The ones who found the answers are still believers, and they have no problem with seeing the connections with Moses' ability to write.
It just struck me because several of them said that they were brought up in evangelical homes. Mm-hmm. In fact, William Deaver, I think he said that he was in Bible school, it was fine. Yeah. Then he went to seminary, and more of a liberal seminary, where he basically lost his faith at that point.
This is exactly why I think this film is so important today, because there are so many young people today are going off to university, and they're taking classes, and they're hearing even at many Christian colleges, that Moses wasn't the author, that we don't really know if these stories happened. We don't really know if there was an Adam and Eve, if there was a flood, if there was an Exodus. But the challenge with that is that if it didn't happen, then what's the rest of the Bible talking about? Because it all builds upon that. So that's why I think it's important for people to see this film and bring their children, bring their relatives, bring their friends, bring a small group, and by the way, bring that skeptical person who's in your life.
Amen to that. That would be a great person. So tell us, when is the movie playing?
It's March 14th, 16th, and 19th. That's a Thursday, a Saturday, and a Tuesday. It's in 950 theaters all across the nation. It's a Fathom event. It's an amazing event. It actually has an intermission and then a panel discussion at the end of it.
Wow.
With Michael Medved and Oz Guinness and Pastor Ara Bernard and myself, and Todd Starnes from Fox News is going to be moderating it.
And that'll give them the ability, they'll hear questions answered in a more, maybe the questions that the movie brought up. So thank you so much for making this film. This is exactly the area that we need to be in as far as Christians. Just putting the answers out there. There are answers. Sometimes we have to dig deep for them, literally dig, sometimes in the case of what Tim did. But there are answers out there. And Tim, you hit on it, right? That this could be something that really begins to ignite faith for maybe a skeptical person. I've already tested it, and it worked. We had a young man who left faith and became an agnostic in a test showing. And afterwards he said, I said, what would you change? And he said, I loved everything. But what he really loved was hearing the debate. You see, you're not free to take information and if you only have one side. And our films basically look at the different viewpoints, and it frees then that person to make a decision. And today, he's come back to faith. Amen. What a tremendous answer. Well, Tim, we're going to ask you to join us in just a moment in our prayer time. But thank you so much for making Patterns of Evidence, the Moses controversy. Check your local listings. It's coming up in the middle of March, the 13th, 14th, the 15th, right? If you go to patternsofevidence.com, patternsofevidence.com, you can get tickets. Okay. All right, wonderful. So check that out, patternsofevidence.com. Make sure that you see this movie. You will never forget it. Well, we'll be back shortly to pray for all your prayer requests.
Throughout history, all known Torah scrolls were written in Hebrew, the language of the Israelites. One reason mainstream scholars doubt that Moses could write the Torah is that they say there was no form of writing like Hebrew in existence at the time of the Exodus. So to establish the possibility that Moses could have written the first books of the Bible, I would have to identify a writing system that Moses could have used that had these components. It would need to exist by the time of the Exodus, because that's when the Bible says Moses was living and writing the early books. It would have to be available in the region of Egypt, because that is where the Bible places Moses and the Israelites in the centuries before the Exodus. And it would need to be a form of writing, like Hebrew, that Moses could have used to write the Torah, because that was the language of the early Israelites. Patterns are powerful tools because they demonstrate a sequence of information. A sequence is much stronger than one random piece of data, and I had learned that to find a pattern in history, you would need all the pieces to fit together.